Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to a brand new series on the Let's Build That App.com channel. I really hope you're doing well. I hope you're having a fabulous morning wherever you are in the world. Now, today's video, we're going to start off a brand new series. And basically, I want to show you guys how to build out this application right here. And we're going to be using the brand new API of iOS 13. It's called the UITableViewDiffableDataSource. Quite a mouthful, but it's actually quite powerful. So this application on the right side, what exactly does it do? Well, let's say I have two different sections for all of my contacts that I want to keep track of, right? You see we have CEOs, we have Elon Musk, Tim Cook, and these peasants down here. Dirty, dirty peasants. So if I want to say, let's say I swipe to the left and I want to favorite Elon Musk, right? I can actually just swipe on the left right here and hit the favorite to favorite and also unfavorite. You can do the same thing for all these rows there. And you can also see that I can delete Tim Cook by just hitting the delete, or I can just swipe all the way to the left. That also deletes as well. So pretty basic stuff, but if you're learning how to build out iOS apps, knowing how to build out this functionality is actually very, very important. And let's say we want to add a new person instead of my contacts list. I can click on the add button, presents a modal inside of my screen. Let's pick one of the interesting photos right here. This is pretty much the user avatar. And this one will be called Waterfalls. And let's say I want to add it to the employee section of my contacts. It's going to show up in this section right here. So in total, we can have 3 sections, or pretty much as many sections as you want. It's going to be kept track of by this toggle right here. All right, so hopefully this style of application is interesting to you. Again, I think being able to build out this will really help you understand iOS development a little bit more. So on the left side of the screen, I have a lot of different topics I want to discuss in the next 4 or 5 videos. And the first thing we have to learn how to do is how we can actually initialize one of these diffable data sources. And the code looks kind of scary because you have to define some generics and also some kind of cell provider. So I'll show you how to create these generics. The first one is the actual section type. The second one is the actual item that is contained inside of your section. Again, sounds confusing, but once you see the code, hopefully it's going to appear pretty basic and pretty easy as well. Once we have our data source going, we obviously have to render out some cells for each one of our item objects here. So the second video, we're going to talk about rendering out cells with each of these UI elements. So you see on the left side, we have image. The middle, we have a label. And then on the right side, we have a start. Now, if you want to draw out all of this UI, doing so in UIKit is pretty easy, but to make these lessons a little bit more interesting for me and also for you, I'm going to draw out these views using SwiftUI, and we're going to figure out how to do that. Thirdly, if we want to add new contacts, we have to create some kind of add button on the top right, present some kind of controller here. Again, I'm going to make this all using SwiftUI. So this page right here, we're going to use SwiftUI, and we have to present it using a hosting controller. Okay, so again, somewhat tricky if you're not used to programming using SwiftUI, but once you see the code, it's actually pretty easy. Now, don't be confused. This list right here is just a simple table view utilizing UIKit. Okay, so it's going to be a mix of a lot of UIKit and SwiftUI. All right, finally, we are going to figure out how to delete objects from the list, right? So if we swipe to the left and hit delete, it's going to delete that object from my diffable data source. And we'll talk about how to remove these items and what a snapshot is on a diffable data source. Lastly, we also have to discuss how to edit these items. So what I mean is if we hit favorite, right, we actually toggle a Boolean on the contact item right here to make sure that the star gets highlighted in black like so. Okay, so that's pretty much all the topics we're going to discuss in the next 5, 6, maybe 7 videos. I have no idea how long this is going to take us. But if we have enough people interested, maybe I'll talk about how to utilize core data to save all of this information inside of the application itself. That way, whenever you restart your application, your list doesn't appear empty. All right, so hopefully this is interesting. Let's get started with a brand new blank project and start coding right now. Okay, so before we begin today's lesson, I just wanted to let everyone know that the rest of the videos for this series, it's only going to be available at letsbuildthatApp.com. So if you want to watch the rest of the videos, just head on over to the homepage and click on the Begin Course button right here to watch all of the videos. Now, if you want to learn how to create a diffable data source for a collection view instead of a table view, you can go ahead and watch the AppStore course right here. There are available lessons all the way at the very bottom of the page instead of section 12. So this is section 11, and section 12 right here teaches us how to build a diffable data source for a collection view instead. And in all of these lessons here, I show you guys how to set up your data source and also how to connect it to the app screen right over here. Now, in addition to the diffable data source, another really useful API that's now available in iOS 13 is the compositional layout. And using this new API, we can lay out this entire screen right over here pretty easily using one single collection view. If you're building out applications now instead of iOS 13, I recommend using this layout component instead of the older flow layout. Okay, so with all that being said, let's go ahead and get back to today's lesson. Alrighty, boys and girls, welcome back to the coding session for today's video. Hope you're ready to get your hands a little bit dirty with some code today. The way we're going to begin today's lesson is to simply create a brand new project inside of Xcode. I have the SwiftUI template checked, so once you create your project, you should have this left content view. And then on the right side here, we have the preview, which is what we're going to use to develop our project. Now, here is the simulator on the right side. You'll notice that I'm actually on the beta version of Xcode, so let me pull that up here. You'll see I'm on 11.4 beta. You can use 11.3 as well. There's nothing too different about these two versions. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and look at this content view here. As you can see, you can just modify this to be whatever, and you'll see the changes pretty much immediately on the right side there. So that's pretty good. Utilizing the preview is going to help us maximize our time, writing code and make sure we don't waste too much time during development. So what I'm going to do right now as the very first thing is to create some kind of container that will allow me to render out a table view. And then once I have my table view, I can slowly modify it to look like this here. And so I'm going to create my container right now. And let's call this my diffable. It's a diffable container, doesn't really matter so much. I'm going to subclass the UI view controller representable, which is a long file name, but that's what we have here. Okay, let me just minimize out of the file explorer because I don't really need to see it. This gives me a little bit more space here. You can see this guy is going to tell you to make this fix here. So just type in your type alias controller type. And then for the type here, it doesn't really matter so much what you put. I'm just going to use a UI view controller here. Okay, so the next thing you have to fix is this right here. So it's going to, tell you to add some stubs, but this guy doesn't look all that great. Let me hit build and just click on this guy and add these stubs right here of make UI view controller and update UI view controller. You don't really need anything in there. So let's just hit the backspace. For this guy, you can just return some kind of UI table view controller. And this is pretty much what it expects. So some kind of view controller, let's just use a table view controller. Once you have your diffable container, you can remove this content view with a 1, 2, 3. And then instead of rendering out the content view, you can have your diffable container instead, which kind of looks like that. I'm going to undo this just a couple of times and just render out the diffable container instead. All right, so you actually need this, otherwise your scene delegate won't compile, so I'll just leave this in here for now. Once you have your preview up and running, you'll see your table view controller on the right side here. You can hit the play and you can drag this up and down. You can kind of see the horizontal line separators as well. So this is a really good way to get your previews up and running. This way you don't waste too much time during development. Okay, so the next thing I have to do is instead of returning just a dummy table view controller, I'm going to create my diffable table view controller, and I'm going to subclass UITableViewController like so, view.load, super view.load like this. And you can give your table view whatever background color you want, just so that you can see it. So I'm going to make a red, use the diffable controller, and I'm going to return this guy instead. Hit Control, or not Control, but Command Option P to resume on the top right. And now you have your red table view there. Okay, so that's a pretty good sign that we have our table view controller rendering. So one other thing I want to do is to add this context title in the navigation bar. And how do I do that? Well, instead of just returning some kind of table view here, I'm going to return the navigation controller with the root view controller here, and just use this as my root view. And what you can do is Command Option P, and this guy should render out correctly. So I'm going to hit this right here, hit the build, and hit the resume. You'll see I have a navigation bar at the very top now in the gray. So to give yourself a title, this is quite easy. Let's make this navigation item dot title equals, I don't know, contacts. That sounds pretty good. I'm going to change it to be something a little bit larger. And I think this is how you do it. So large titles, use that. And then now we can prefer large titles, and now we get contacts like so. Okay, this is looking pretty good. And the next thing you probably want to do is to either render out some cells, or maybe do something else with the background here. So something that's new in iOS 13 is the ability to group your sections to look something like this. And the way to do that is for your table view controller right here, right? There's actually an instantiation parameter that you can pass in called the table view style, and just hit dot. And the new one that you can access is called insect group, like that. And once you have that, you should hit the play. And then you'll notice that the background color is kind of this gray color now, and you no longer have those separated lines. So in order to start rendering out these cells, you actually have to make sure that your table view has some cells and some data to render out. So why don't we go ahead and talk about how to render out some data using this thing called a UITableViewDiffableDataSource, like that. Okay, so how does this guy work? Well, what I want to do is to go ahead and register some kind of source. So the way I like to do this is to make sure that this is pretty compact. I'm going to create some kind of private function, and let's just call it setup source. So what goes inside of this function is the actual source that I want to create. So I'm just going to call it source, and the source is going to be some kind of variable, and it's a lot easier to create this guy using this style. You'll notice that UITableViewDiffableDataSource is going to tell you to actually provide it with two different generics. The first one is this section right here, and the second one is the actual item that you want to render out per cell. So again, this might sound a little bit confusing, but once you see the code and once you see it in action, it starts to become really easy to understand. So first thing we have to tackle is what exactly is this section type? Well, this is really easy. I'm going to call this I'll call it the section type. It doesn't matter so much, but that sounds like a pretty good name. And we can have the case, let's say CEO, and let's say peasants as well. So peasants, like that. And now we have this section type as the first generic inside of our data source. So this means that we have two sections. You can add as many sections as you want. It doesn't have to be two. The next thing is this item identifier type hashable. And this guy is going to be my actual content type. And you have to make sure that it conforms to the hashable protocol right here. We'll discuss exactly what that means later on. For the actual contact, right, we have a couple of different things that we want to keep track of. The first is the image, second is the name, and also this Boolean that keeps track of whether or not this row is favorited. So to make things easier, let's just create the name first, and that should be okay. I'm going to pass this in as my contact, and everything looks pretty good. Okay, so now that we have this, right, you can go ahead and hit equal and say dot init. And using this type of syntax, it's going to make your lives a lot easier in terms of having Xcode help you fill out the autocomplete. So this is typically how I set up my diffable data source. Okay, so let's go ahead and fill in these parameters. Otherwise, your code is not going to work. I'm going to go ahead and say self.tableView. You don't really need the self, but for the recording, I think it makes a little bit more sense to have the self there. Okay, so for this guy, just hit enter for the cell provider. And basically, this cell provider is going to help you render out a cell here. This is just a closure, and these are the parameters that you want to fill out. If you don't care about the table view, you can just use underscore. I don't think we need it. Let's use index path. And for the contact, you can use contact like this here. Okay, so now inside of this closure, it expects us to return some kind of cell. And for a table view, it's a lot easier to create cells just doing this. You don't really have to register a cell, just use this and you should be okay. I'm going to use default, and for the reuse identifier, just use nil. But if you're making a production application, make sure to register and also dequeue cells within identifier. And now what I can do is text label that text equals some name here, and we should be okay. I think finally I need to return this cell because this closure expects me to return some kind of cell. And this should be all I need in terms of setting up exactly what I want in my table view. There's this guy, enums must not contain stored properties. So I believe this guy is actually going to be a struct instead. So make sure to change that. And now your code should be able to compile. Okay, this looks pretty good. And you see, after running this project in the preview, you're not going to get anything inside of your list just yet. What you want to do is you want to create some kind of snapshot. And I'll explain what the snapshot is in just one moment. So the snapshot, you get it from the actual data source above. So this is the source from above. What you do is you just create a snapshot like this, and you want to make sure it's a var because we're going to be modifying it. And for the snapshot, right, you can go ahead and hit dot and look at all of the available methods on this little drop down here. So one thing that I want to do is I want to append this top section with Elon Musk underneath the CEO section. So the way I'm going to do that is to first append a section to my snapshot. And then this guy is an array, or it expects an array. So you can just use CEO. And then next I'm going to say snapshot.append, and you get this one right here. I believe you can use this as well, but to be more, I guess, specific, you probably want to declare this CEO type. So CEO right here, so .CEO. And now the interesting part is to create the identifiers, right? It's an array, it's an enter. And right here, just say .init. You'll see the autocomplete comes up for the actual contact right here. And the way it knows about how to fill out this contact right here is because we're setting up the data source with this generic on the right side. All right, so make sure you understand what's going on. Once you do that, you can declare some kind of name here, and let's go with Elon Musk as the very first name. Okay, so once we have our snapshot set up with one section and one item right here, you can then say source right here, which is your source above, and you want to apply this snapshot there. And again, our snapshot has one section and one item in it. You'll see the preview still doesn't really render anything out, and this part might be a little bit confusing, but if you don't have some kind of reference to this source here, it's going to be automatically, I guess, garbage collected, and it's going to disappear from your application. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that this guy is kept as a reference on the table view controller itself. So let's just cut that, and I'm going to move that over here. Once you move it as a local instance, you're not going to be able to access this table view here, so this guy with a self on it. And to access self, you want to make sure that these guys are lazily instantiated. Don't ask me exactly what that is. The discussion requires quite a few videos to talk about. So just make sure it's lazy var and you should be fine. All right, so now that we are set up, I'm going to try again. and we can see exactly what our table view should render out. So sometimes you might get a crash, and I don't see exactly what the crash is just yet. So what I'm going to do is to hit the backspace, and you'll see it refreshes like that. And then you'll see that sub name over here is appearing inside of my cell there. So what I can do is I can enter another contact in the list of items down below and just say init, and let's say Tim Cook right here. And you'll see the same cell appearing. And the reason why it's saying that is because of this cell being returned by your cell provider. So cell provider is basically this closure here. Now, in order to make sure that the name is filled out correctly, you want to access the contact parameter here and just replace this guy with the .name. And now hit Command Option P. It's going to resume with the actual names that you specify here. Again, this guy can be whatever you want. So whatever. And this is going to appear on the right side just like so. Okay, so it looks like our application on the right side here is really starting to take shape. A couple of things that we are missing right now are the headers up here, as well as a second section for our table view. Let's hit the stop and play. You can drag this guy down like so. To introduce a second section, it's pretty easy. You can add a different section right here. So just say whatever is your section type. And then that's my second section. And then I can do this here. So snapshot below, append items. And the other section is the peasant section. Okay, so who's going to be my contact in here? Let's just say Bill Gates. Bill Gates is quite rich, but in today's example, he'll be a peasant. So you'll see Bill Gates showing up in the second group inside of our table view. Again, this is only available in iOS 13 with the inset group style. All right, moving on, let's just finally wrap up today's video by perhaps talking about the CEO and peasant header titles. And this is pretty easy if you know what you're doing. Here's my table view, right? You can go down here and there's a method called title for header. And this method used to work, but I don't know exactly why this little title for header, it doesn't show up inside of my table view anymore. So it's kind of unfortunate. We can't use that method anymore. So we'll have to do this the manual way. I think we want to say view for header, which is this method here. So view for header in section. And below, we want to create some kind of UI view that will render out as a label. You can do this, in a lot of different ways, but I'm going to just create it manually here. Let's just say label, and what are you? Label.text equals header, so header title, whatever that is going to be. Let's talk about that in just one moment. You see we have our label being returned, hit the resume. You should get something in your view, which looks like that. Pretty weird. You might want to say height for header in section, return, 50. Obviously, you can modify this to be whatever you want. Command Option P to resume your simulator there. And that's looking a lot nicer. The next thing you might want to talk about is, well, how do I know exactly what the header title needs to be? You can do a couple of different things, I guess. So here's our section right here, right? So if you know your hard-coded sections, let's say we have the CEOs up here, and then the second section is the whatever peasants or whatever you want to call it. You can just do a simple check on this parameter here. So if this is equal to 0, then we can use that. And otherwise, we can use a second title. So second title here. And this looks pretty good. This is going to be CEO for now. And this one right here is going to be the peasants below. So there's actually a much better way of determining what the section title has to be. But maybe I'll show you guys how to do that in a later video. And that's going to be it for today's lesson. Remember, if you want to watch the rest of the videos for this series, just head on over to the homepage of letsbuildthatApp.com and click on the free begin course button right over here. If you guys have any questions or comments, make sure to leave them down below. And that's going to be it for today. I will see you guys in the next lesson. Bye bye, guys.